This is a three-part film about a voyage across the South Atlantic Ocean from Cape Horn to the Cape of Good Hope. Part 2 covers 8 separate landings on South Georgia to see that isolated island's amazing wildlife and scenery, and to explore its tragic whaling history.
South Georgia is a Disneyland for nature lovers due to its amazing fauna. We made 8 landings along the east coast of South Georgia while cruising from north to south and then back north before sailing northeast to Tristan da Cunha. South Georgia is a British overseas territory that was claimed by Captain James Cook, who circumnavigated the island in 1775 and made the first landing there. The island is 167 kilometers long by up to 37 kilometers wide. There is no native population. We saw 4 of the 8 major species of penguins at South Georgia. Our first landing on South Georgia was at Salisbury Plain, which is a broad coastal plain on the Bay of Isles. Upon entering the Bay of Isles, we were greeted by fur seals porpoising along. Because of the strong winds in the bay, we could not land at the primary landing site on Salisbury Plain near the front of the large king penguin colony. Instead, we'd have to land at the secondary landing site. This meant that we'd have a 1.5 long hike over marshy grounds and across streams to get to the colony. On the landing beach, we were greeted by king penguins and young fur seals, including an unusual blonde one. We set off across the streams to get to the king penguin colony, but the aggressive seal pups along the way had to be intimidated to avoid potential bites. In fact, a member of our group was twice bitten by a seal pup. Fortunately, his pants and boots prevented a skin puncture and the ensuing infection.
Hello. Hello. Hey. No. Back.
Along the hike to the king penguin colony, we had good views of giant petrels, fur seals, and king penguins. The coloration of the king penguin is quite pretty, especially when viewed up close. The incessant rain made for muddy conditions and accounted for the loss of several cameras due to water penetration. The king penguin colony has over 100,000 penguins, hence it is a noisy place, and there were many late-season chicks whose survival was questionable. The colony was visited by regular predators, namely skuas and giant petrels, looking for unattended eggs or chicks to eat. We watched a couple of penguins battling for dominance by means of hard flipper slapping. If we stopped near the penguins, the curious ones would come up to check us out. Back at the beach, we passed the time waiting for a zodiac by happily watching the seal pups scooting about.
Okay.
Back on board the ship, we watched a king penguin flying through the water with ease. Leaving Salisbury Plain, we dried out our cameras and happily left behind the rain for the rest of our visit to South Georgia. Due to strong winds, we couldn't visit Pryan Island in the Bay of Isles where the wandering albatrosses nest, so we sailed to the shelter of Rosita Harbour. Rosita Harbour is a small bay on the west side of the Bay of Isles. It is named after the whaling ship Rosita, which started operating out of South Georgia in 1905. Sailing into Rosita Harbour, we saw a rainbow and passed by a sailboat motoring out of the bay. Heading ashore in a Zodiac, we passed by a flock of giant petrels in a feeding frenzy sitting on the water. What they were fighting over was not clear, but they were ripping out chunks of flesh. Juvenile fur seals dominated the beach with a few gentoo penguins thrown in for variety. A rare blonde juvenile fur seal stood out from its confreres. It was fascinating to watch the fur seal pups on the beach. They were very curious, and if you sat down, some would come up to check you out.
Don't bite my foot, whatever you friggin' well do.
Very surprisingly, there was a large deracinated tree on the beach. Since there were no trees on South Georgia, the large tree trunk must have made a very long journey here from the South American mainland. Up on the bluff overlooking the beach, there were adult fur seals with their pups in the tussock grass. To get back down to the beach, we had to pass by a large group of fur seals who were not happy to see us and made it clear. Walking back along the beach to the pickup point, we had another good look at the blonde juvenile fur seal playing with his mates. We returned back to the ship as the sunset was coming on. Once everybody in the Zodiacs were back on board, we sailed overnight south to Stromness. We sailed into Stromness Bay, which is the home of 3 whaling stations, namely Husvik, Stromness, and Leith Harbour, but we would only land at Stromness Whaling Station. The Stromness Whaling Station opened in 1907, and it operated as a whaling station until 1931 when it was converted into a ship repair yard. It closed in 1961 with the demise of the South Georgia whaling industry, and the site was abandoned. Stromness is perhaps best known as the goal of Ernest Shackleton's epic 1,300-kilometer journey from Elephant Island to South Georgia across the treacherous Southern Ocean in a 22-foot-long open lifeboat in 1916. After landing on the western shore of South Georgia, Shackleton and 2 companions trekked across South Georgia's mountainous and glaciated interior to get help at Stromness for the rescue of their shipmates still trapped on Elephant Island. The landing beach was populated with hundreds of fur seal pups playing in the water and moving this way and that. Unfortunately, the British health and safety job worthies have declared the station out of bounds, which makes it impossible to explore the ruins, as you must keep 200 meters away from them. After looking at the station from afar, we walked 2.5 kilometers to Shackleton's waterfall, where Shackleton came down over the hill, having crossed the Koenig Glacier at Fortuna Bay. The hike to the waterfall was up a gravel outwash plain broken up by braided streams which had to be crossed and recrossed. Finally, we arrived at the base of the Shackleton waterfall and climbed up to its top for the great view out to Stromness Bay and the Stromness whaling station on its shore. This was the view that Shackleton and his two companions would have had in 1916 when they realized that they would indeed reach the Stromness whaling station and get help for the rescue of their shipmates still trapped on Elephant Island. From the top of the waterfall, we hiked back to the beach at Stromness whaling station for the Zodiac ride back to the ship. Leaving Stromness, we sailed by the nearby Rosita Harbour, the largest of 7 whaling stations on South Georgia. It operated from 1909 until 1965, when the whale population became commercially unviable. Exiting Stromness Bay, we were back on the open ocean, sailing in heavy swell southwards to Cumberland Bay. Cumberland Bay is a large bay surrounded by beautiful snow and ice-covered mountains. It is the site of the Grytviken whaling station and hosts the British government representatives. Grytviken is the site of a settlement that was so named in 1902 by a Swede who found Old English pots used to render seal oil at the site. Grytviken is Swedish for the Pot Bay. There are several shipwrecks in Cumberland Bay, including the wreck of the Korean fishing vessel Moresco No. 1 that sank in a storm in 2003. Grytviken is the best harbour on the island. The site is quite sheltered, provides a substantial area of flat land suitable for building, and has a good supply of fresh water. Adjacent to Grytviken is King Edward Point, where the representatives of the British government are quartered. At the beginning of the Falklands War on 3rd of April 1982, Argentinian forces occupied King Edward Point and took control of South Georgia, but they were soon expelled by the British during Operation Parakeet. Apart from seeing the wildlife, a visit to South Georgia would not be complete without a visit to see the Grytviken whaling station, as it illustrates the incredible impact that human activity can have on nature, in this case, whales.
The oil is stored for a time in large covered tanks until it is taken by ships to the refineries.
The Grytviken Cemetery holds fascinating old graves, many from the whaling era. However, the most famous one is that of the Antarctic explorer Ernest Shackleton. He died of a heart attack at South Georgia in 1921 whilst aboard his ship at the start of another expedition. The Norwegian Lutheran Church, or Whalers Church, has been beautifully restored. The church was pre-built in Norway and erected in Grytviken by whalers and consecrated on Christmas Day, 1913. The library for the whaling station, with its old card catalogue, is found in the church. Looking around at the remains of the impressively large whale processing equipment, it is not clear how whale carcasses ended up as oil and other products that were consumed so widely around the world in a bygone era. Fortunately, wandering amongst the remains of the whaling station, it is not difficult to flash back in time to Grytviken in 1930, when the station was in full production.
Here we are in Grytviken, the southernmost whaling station in the world. The island may seem empty from a distance, but closer there is a lot going on. This little town was built purely because of whales. Around 200 men work here in summer. There are workshops, saddleries, a wharf, and shops. Many of the machines were produced right here. Chicken and sheep are kept in pens. Here comes another whale. A nice piece of meat for the many hungry mouths in Europe is hauled up onto land. Heavy spiked shoes prevent the flencers from sliding around on the slippery whales and the bloody excrement-covered ground. Rotating knives chop up the whale's outer layer of blubber, which is then transported to the blubber cookery by a conveyor belt. The whale can be used for more purposes than any other animal on Earth. It's amazing how many things this good-natured colossus provides us with. Oil for printing ink, oil for artists' paint, oil for shoe polish, oil for cannon grease, oil for lamps, lubricants, oil for machines, oil for machine guns, stearin for candles, stearin for soap, margarine, glycerin, nitroglycerin, nitroglycerin for grenades, nitroglycerin for bombs, nitroglycerin for whaling harpoons. But also insulin for diabetics, gelatin for pills, gelatin for cooking, gelatin for film, gelatin for glue, bones for combs, bone for buttons, fertilizers for the garden, whalebone for brushes, whalebone for brooms, whalebone for corsets, oil for cod liver oil, ambra for perfume, ambra to increase potency, whale meat for cat food, whale meat for dog food, and of course, whale steaks for the connoisseur.
The whaling station closed in December 1966, by which time the whale stocks were so low that their continued exploitation was not possible. Since then, the station has been declared an area of special tourist interest, but many of the structures have been removed under the rubric of health and safety. About 2 kilometers north of Grytviken is Grytviken Bay, where early sealers operated. We hiked over the hills along the trail, despite the incessant rain and marginal views afforded us. Finally, it was time to return to our ship and sail away from this vestige of the whaling industry, and southwards towards the wildlife at Gold Harbour. Our next stop was a small bay named Gold Harbour. Gold Harbour is so called because the sun's rays make the cliffs yellowish near sunrise and sunset. It is the Bertrab Glacier, which flows down to the sea at the head of Gold Harbour, that makes this a spectacular place to view wildlife. We had an interesting race with the waves when going ashore. Landing on the black sand beach, we had a wonderful view of king penguins and juvenile fur seals lining the beach, with a backdrop formed by the spectacular Bertrab Glacier. Right near the landing site was a hollow with a large number of giant elephant seals. The seals were resting cheek to jowl, despite the space available, because they were molting skin in large patches, which made them susceptible to the cold, so they rested together on land in a huddle. The elephant seals find it tiring to move their huge bulk around on land. Although the mating season was over, the bulls practiced the fighting that they would need to become a beach master and keep a large harem during the mating season. Even though it was just practice, the fighting drew blood as the giant seals reared up and tried to get in a position to bite the opponent's neck. Elephant seal bulls reach a length of 5 meters and a weight of 3,000 kilograms, while the cows reach 3 meters and 1,000 kilograms. Elephant seals were hunted to the edge of extinction at the end of the 19th century, but the numbers have since recovered. Elephant seals take their name from the large proboscis of the adult male bull, which resembles a small elephant's trunk when the bull is fully grown. The bull's proboscis is used in producing loud roaring noises, especially during the mating season. As it scratched itself, the elephant seal's flipper looked surprisingly like an arm wearing a glove. Leaving the impressive elephant seals, we walked down the beach towards the penguin colony, passing by juvenile elephant seals. There was the odd, lonely Gentoo penguin looking forlorn on the beach. At the king penguin colony, we watched the scavengers at work. A snowy sheathbill was busy trying to get the last of the yolk from an abandoned penguin egg. It wasn't long before a skua noticed the egg and had a go at it too. The cacophony of the penguin colony was briefly interrupted by a large calving event from the hanging glacier on the slopes of Mount Patterson. It was surprising to see the difficulty that the penguins, who are such strong swimmers, had in trying to get through the surf zone. As we were heading back to the pickup zone to return to the ship, we noticed a lone Gentoo penguin looking like he was trying to fly. Leaving Gold Harbor, we cruised southwards towards Cooper Bay, which was discovered by a British expedition under Captain James Cook in 1775 during his second great voyage of discovery. Nearing Cooper Bay, it was cold, and we could see large icebergs passing by our starboard side. At anchor in Cooper Bay, we could see a chinstrap penguin colony on the southern point with huge icebergs in the background. We did not land at Cooper Bay, rather we made a Zodiac cruise around the bay. At Cooper Bay there is a macaroni penguin colony, which gave us our first opportunity to see this species of penguin. macaroni penguin is an attractive penguin due to the crest of yellow feathers that adorns its head. There were several penguins in the midst of a catastrophic molt, i.e. when all their feathers are replaced at the same time. Without insulation, the penguins are unable to enter the cold ocean and feed until the molting is complete. All was not sweetness and light as the penguins scrapped over space on the rock.
You see them fighting, Donald?
Out behind us, that has been rat free all the time. Never had rats. Always going to be a right? Never had rats.
Leaving the macaroni penguins, we cruised over to see a large mass of 4-month-old fur seals. These juvenile seals were very active and curious about our presence. It was fun to see the seals in action underwater as they scooted about and came up to the Zodiac. Overhead, the sun shone through the lenticular clouds, creating a rainbow effect. Leaving the seals, we cruised over to see the chinstrap penguins coming and going from their colony on the point that we had seen earlier from the ship.
They're coming in right behind you.
We got an interesting underwater view of chinstrap penguins coming and going from their colony. It was always interesting when returning to the ship to pass in front of the ship for the view of the bow. Leaving Cooper Bay, we cruised southwards toward Drygalski Fjord on the southeast extremity of South Georgia. We passed by a whale which was easily identified as a southern right whale due to its distinctive V-shaped blow. Nearing Drygalski Fjord, the sea was full of large icebergs, and the sharp mountain peaks were topped by saucer-shaped lenticular clouds. Drygalski Fjord, named for Professor Drygalski, the leader of the first German Antarctic expedition of 1901 to 1903, is a fjord 1.6 kilometers wide and 11 kilometers deep. The mountains that line the fjord are cloaked with glaciers that spill down into the sea, making for beautiful scenery.
The Risting Glacier marks the end of the fjord. Like other glaciers around the world, it has retreated significantly over the past 50 years. There was a small calving event at the front of the Risting Glacier as we turned to start our way back out of the fjord. Unfortunately, I missed the start of it.
Exiting the fjord, we sailed back northward through the icebergs towards Jason Harbour. Overnight we sailed back north, onwards to Jason Harbour. Jason Harbour is a bay 1.5 kilometers wide, named after the Jason, a Norwegian whaling ship that visited here in 1894. We arrived at Jason Harbour in the early morning. However, even though we were inside this little bay, there was a strong wind with gusts up to 70 knots accompanied by rain. Hence it wasn't until 2 in the afternoon that the winds had dropped down sufficiently that we were able to disembark for a landing on the shore of Jason Harbour. We landed on a shingle beach and were greeted by young fur seals who were curious about the visitors. The remains of seal pups that didn't make it were scattered along the beach. Apart from seal pups, Jason Harbour hosted king penguins. These penguins had to ward off the unwanted attention of the curious young fur seals. There was one lonesome gentoo penguin amongst the king penguins. The beach also hosted several young elephant seals, which were clearly larger than their fur seal counterparts, even though both were born this birthing season. Even at this young age, the nose of the elephant seal is infested with a mite that causes frequent snorting and a whitish nasal discharge. On the marshy ground back from the beach, there were king penguins with late-season chicks. Given the lateness of the season, the survival of these chicks was in doubt. One penguin was busy keeping chicks away from her and the egg that she was sitting on. However, a closer look showed that she was trying to incubate a broken egg. This strange behavior was surpassed by a nearby penguin trying to raise a chick from the dead. It appeared that both of these penguins were too immature to know what had happened to their offspring. The nearby giant petrels may well have been the predators responsible for both the broken empty egg and the dead chick. In any event, they kept walking around the king penguins with their young. A short distance away from the penguins, the petrels and an uninvited skua were picking clean the remains of a penguin. As it was time to get back to the beach and return to the ship, we next faced the challenging task of finding a route to the beach, through the fen, and past the territorial fur seals who challenged anything coming into their small area.
Just passing by. Yeah. Okay.
Once back on the beach, we headed back to the ship via Zodiac, and soon were sailing north again over the high seas. That evening we were blessed by the most glorious sunset of our trip. The sinking sun spread a golden glow over the clouds and the sea, with the ragged glacier-draped mountains of South Georgia adding to the beautiful scene. However, the sunset was soon over, and it was off to the St. Paddy's Day supper. Fortuna Bay, a short cruise north from Jason Harbour, was to be our final stop on South Georgia before we headed eastward towards Tristan da Cunha. We headed ashore early in the morning at 5:30 a.m., so the landing beach was in shadow when we first stepped ashore and watched the penguins entering the sea. The surf caused the penguins some difficulty as they struggled in the surf zone, whether coming or going from their feeding grounds. Within an hour, the valley leading back to the penguin colony and the glacier beyond was in sunlight, and there were two streams of penguins in the valley, one heading out to sea, and the other one returning back from sea to the colony. It looked just like a factory shift change at dawn. Giant petrels and skuas prey on the penguin colony and also police up the dead. They patrol the edges of the colony and at times land amongst the penguins looking for unattended eggs or vulnerable chicks. Skuas waste no time in policing up a penguin carcass. The floor of the valley is a wide glacial outwash plain, laced by a network of braided streams that flow down from the Koenig Glacier. The glacier was named by the Second German Antarctic Expedition of 1911-1912. Apart from the incessant noise of the adult penguins and their chicks, the colony is full of penguins jostling and using their sharp beaks to send a message to disruptive chicks. A penguin's feathers are very important for keeping them warm and dry while they're in the cold ocean water, but over a year's worth of wear and tear on their feathers causes the insulation value to degrade, In order to replace these feathers, penguins go through what is called a catastrophic molt, because unlike most birds that molt a few feathers at a time, penguins molt all their feathers at once, leaving them unable to enter the ocean and feed until the molting is complete. After Ernest Shackleton made his epic voyage from Elephant Island to South Georgia Island in an open boat, he had to then make the perilous crossing of South Georgia to get help at the Stromness whaling station. The last part of this journey involved crossing the Koenig Glacier above Fortuna Bay. In Shackleton's day, the Koenig Glacier reached the sea, but today it has retreated 2 kilometers back up the valley. On my last visit to Fortuna Bay in 2012, we made the Shackleton walk over the pass to the Stromness whaling station, which is 6 kilometers east. However, following a hiker's death in 2012, there was a recommendation that hikers carry group shelters sufficient to accommodate the complete party. For this reason, we did not make the hike. With our return to the ship, our time on South Georgia was unfortunately over, but we still had adventures ahead.
In part 3, the concluding part of this film, we'll make a landing on the very remote island of Tristan da Cunha, and our voyage will end with a visit to the remarkable city of Cape Town.
Take me somewhere